Welcome, everyone, to our brand new podcast called Getting Deep with a PhD and a JD.
I'm Nikki. I am PhD. I am a professor at an urban university, and I teach research and human behavior.
And I am Kimmy, the JD of this duo. I currently work with a continuing education provider for attorneys, and I also have my own estate planning practice.
So you must be wondering, what is this podcast all about? Well, this podcast is a spirited and analytical discussion about relevant news topics that are not a part of your daily timeline. Not only will you learn something new, you will be inspired to action. All right. So now, Kimmy, question for you.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so what do the following things have in common? Rosewood, Florida, Seneca Village, New York, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Atlanta, Georgia, Forsyth County, Georgia, and Susanna, Alabama.
Okay, so those actually sound like former Black towns that were self-sufficient, prosperous, economically independent, but then were intentionally destroyed because of due to racist actions.
Yes!
Am I right?
Yes!
Yeah.
So that is what we are going to be talking about today. We are going to be talking about Black ghost towns.
Yeah.
And when we think about Black ghost towns are places where settlements existed. They were self-sufficient. They were prosperous. They were inhabited by predominantly Black folks. And the unfortunate thing is that these places were all destroyed by racism in one way or another.
Or another, yeah.
Yeah, and in many of these cases, racism occurred because folks were afraid of lies that were spread. For example, people in particular, white women claiming to be sexually assaulted or assaulted by Black men. And as a result of those lies and rumors, these towns were destroyed.
And I feel like it was subterfuge, really. Whether they were actually afraid, I don't know. But I definitely feel like those incidences were just mere subterfuge to destroy a Black community. And we got the term ghost town because there were specific establishments or towns, developments that were actually literally turned into lakes and rivers. Like they were literally drowned out. And I think that's what sort of tipped us, you and I, off to cover this topic, because there are certain towns that we are aware of that are in our timelines, but what's not in our timelines are these cities.
Yeah.
And there's one here in Atlanta that you mentioned, Lake Lanier.
Yeah.
And that lake is completely covering a Black town. And it's interesting because whenever the summertime comes around and people go out on Lake Lanier, they don't always make it back.
Oh.
And for a lot, and people would joke about, Lake Lanier is haunted. I'm not going out on Lake Lanier because there's just so many incidences. And then it comes to find out it is in fact over a town.
A town. And and that's the thing that when we started thinking about this podcast, I thought I knew a lot about racism and historical trauma and all of these different things. And then we started talking about places that were flooded, where lakes exist now. And
there's multiple.
And there are multiple. I mean,
Yeah.
and there are organizations that study what we've called Black ghost towns. There are organizations out there that do that. And so
Yeah.
it's really shocking. It's surprising that this history has been lost. And I think one of the important things is to really recognize what has truly been lost. I mean, because we can talk about the money, which we're going to do. We're going to talk about the emotional aspects. We're going to talk about how people were left after they basically lost their towns, and they didn't have any laws to support them.
Right.
Or, I mean, in many of the cases, I know one of the articles that I read, it talked about how in Tulsa, the town was burning, and people the law enforcement folks just stood by and let it burn. And so not only are we talking about places that were destroyed, but there wasn't any recourse at the time for folks who lost lots of things. And so you're going to talk about the financial aspects. And so
that's a good segue.
That's a great segue into that.
So I'm, what we'll do over the course of our podcast is I will more than likely present the legal or financial aspects of whatever is going on. And Nikki will talk about the the
biopsychosocial, spiritual piece of it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what I did was I took a common occurrence because that has the most research and the most analysis of what was lost, how what the economic and legal impact was on that occurrence. And so that's the 1921 Tulsa massacre. Nikki mentioned that. And one of the articles that I looked at was an article from the Brookings Institute. And so let's first start by saying Tulsa was a self-sufficient, financially stable economy that consisted largely of Black Americans. Their money circulated between Black residents, Black banks, Black businesses, and stayed in the community for at least 19 months. Black people owned homes, real property, which appreciates in value. It's the linchpin of financial wealth here in America, and probably everywhere else. There were hospitals, there were schools. It was completely, self-sustaining community. So, in this particular situation, of course, the incident was a claim of rape by a white woman at the hands of a Black man. And like I said, they sort of used that as subterfuge to then go destroy this town. And in one of the newspapers, the Tulsa newspaper, there was a quote that says, "The old nigger town must never be allowed in Tulsa again."
Wow.
So when we talk about the economic impact of that, one of the first things is that, that piqued my interest was the fact that because the incident, was termed a race riot, insurance companies denied claims to property owners. And they also did not receive any sort of assistance from their local, state, or the federal government.
Because of the way it was deemed as a riot.
As a race riot.
Versus what actually happened.
What it actually was. But the interesting thing is then, by 1925, the town rebuilt without any help. But then, between 1960 and 1980, Back in 1921, it's violence. They destroyed the town by violence, fire, burning it down, just terrorizing the citizens of that community. But between 1960 and 1980, we then started to destroy the town through economic and political policy, right? Economic policy. And we're talking about eminent domain, we're talking about rezoning, we're talking about highway construction and racist redlining. And when we talk about what the result of that is you have a whole entire community who did not benefit from the value of the real estate that they owned.
Right.
Right. So they could not pass that wealth down to their children who wanted to go to college or try to buy their own homes when they graduated and start businesses. So when we look at the numbers, we're talking about 1,200 homes were destroyed. Okay, so that's 1,200 families that did not get remuneration for their lost property. 1,200 families. And then you have that was 1.8 million in damage claims, which would be $27 million today. And what is interesting is that all of the claims were denied except for one, which was a claim submitted by a white shop owner.
Wow. And so they actually agreed to fulfill that claim.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Wow. And so racism, once again, yeah.
The value of the houses and other assets that were contained in those houses would be upwards of $200 million. Then this is just one city now.
Right.
Remember, this is just one city, $200 million. The lost business ownership would result in a potential or loss of a potential revenue of $10 billion. One community. Okay, so as you can see, that that impact, that legal impact, the economical impact, is certainly could provide the basis for claims of reparations. I mean, these actions were taken deliberately and intentionally.
Right.
And if and so in order to pay that back, that has to be deliberate as well.
Right.
It's not just, okay, well, you're on the same footing now. No, that's not enough.
Yeah. And we've talked a lot about the economic piece of it. And there's a whole legacy of trauma that's occurred because of this. And there's research out there that talks about trauma being transmitted from parent to child. So we know that if you're raised by a parent who has experienced trauma, that parent's parenting style could be impacted by their trauma. And so your experience with them may be very different. But did you know that if we look at a cellular level, there's actually research out there that talks about epigenetics, or looking at the genes and how genes are expressed and turned on basically because of trauma. And so some of the articles that I looked at folks like Holocaust survivors, folks who were veterans of wars, genocide, people who had experienced genocide, slavery. And so what they've looked at, and they've looked at a lot of animal studies, but they've also looked at people, and people who experienced all this trauma, and they tried to get a sense of normalcy back to their lives. And so they were coping and getting assistance. Their children may not have experienced any of these psychological, the trauma associated. However, their children had a higher rate of depression and anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder. And they weren't the ones who experienced those specific incidences. And so researchers are really starting to look at genes and what happens when a person experiences this type of trauma, and how genes can actually be changed, therefore transmitting these experiences to future
So the
generations.
trauma is cellular.
So the trauma, yeah. And, and Black folks have been talking about this. We talk about the trauma of slavery and how,
Absolutely.
and how that, even though we may not have been slaves, but thinking about how we react to certain things, and the level, the level of mental illness, or what we deem as mental illness, being a traumatic response, being a trauma response. And so I think, as we think about these places that were prosperous, people were living their lives, doing the right thing,
Minding their business.
And then all of a sudden, what they had was taken away. But it was taken away not by a natural disaster. It was intentionally taken away.
Yeah.
And there were systems that supported these pieces being taken away.
Yes.
The law enforcement didn't help. They encouraged it. They stood by. They watched it happen.
Just like with the insurance claim.
Absolutely. So the system. So when you're in a situation where people are intentionally doing this to you, there's a feeling of hopelessness and helplessness that can easily come. But I also want to mention that people did rebuild. They were able to rebuild. But as you mentioned, there were still systemic issues that were there and did not allow them to really regain everything that they had before and to really flourish.
Yeah. I mean, you can't just take my money, because you're taking the power of the appreciation with it.
With it, absolutely.
So
absolutely,
you can't just say, well, now you can buy a house, now you can start a business. Yeah, but we're all starting at ground zero.
Right.
When you have your counterparts that were not victims of this type of behavior, they're not starting from ground zero.
Exactly. And they
mom and grandmom started the insurance agency back in 1940.
Right.
And they're just, they already have a book of business. Their book of business is children, their children. They then become your clients and your customers. That brand awareness is already there. So so you have to compensate for the actual dollars and cents. We live in America where it is a capitalist society.
And what does it mean when you have children that the only people that they see are people who look like them, who are poor and incarcerated, or they aren't exposed to role models that have wealth. I mean, I think about what I learned in school and how it almost seems like the history of Black folks in America started with slavery and then ended with people being incarcerated, mass incarceration. And we're not taught about the doctors and the lawyers and all of the businesses and just the prosperous and the newspapers and all of the things that existed that were destroyed because of racism and because of the systematic discrimination. We're not taught about that necessarily. And so when you have young kids, and representation matters. And that's the other thing when we talk about looking at folks and thinking about the capacity for people to grow and develop. Well, part of that is being able to imagine that you can do it. And part of that is to be able to see people like you who have these roles and have the ability to do that. And so all of those people were prosperous, and that was just taken away. And so that legacy was just taken away.
Yeah, the legacy goes along with
it. The legacy. I mean, that's what we're...
And it creates I feel like it creates this scarcity mindset as well in the Black community, because the unavailability of resources, The and so when you happen to uh, uh, gain access, very limited access, you have the scarcity mindset in that, oh, okay, this can go away.
Right. And because it can go away, I have to protect it, and I have to be very cautious
Yes.
about
Yes.
who I partner with, or I have to be very cautious. So in other words, it's moving from a very collective model, very
Mm-hmm.
collectivist society that, like, for example, in Tulsa and lots
To a
of these places,
survivalist.
they work together to
Mm-hmm.
create this wonderful town, these wonderful towns. But
Mm-hmm.
now it shifts to a survivalist mentality,
Mm-hmm.
which means that I've got mine, and
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to help anybody else, because if I help you, I might lose what I have.
And then also, and yeah, that's very true. And then there's also that the aspect of, because you have this scarcity mindset, you lose out on opportunity.
Yeah.
Meaning, if we're going to talk about from the business aspect, really to grow businesses, you have to invest money, you have to spend money,
Right.
right? To
Right.
In order for a business to be prosperous. But so many of us have this scarcity mindset because of these things that have happened in the past.
Exactly.
That if we are trying to engage in an entrepreneurial endeavor, it fails because we're afraid to invest. Afraid to seek out capital.
Hmm.
We're afraid of doing those things because, God forbid, something were to happen.
Right. And we already have a history of seeing that the systems did not protect everyone equally.
Mm-hmm. And it's like everyone can have that scarcity mindset, but it's an extra layer
Right.
because for us, because these folks did well. These folks self-sufficient. They were doing all of these things in spite of,
In
right? They were.
spite of all the
Mhm.
discrimination, the Jim Crow
Yeah.
and everything. And it's interesting because in some of the articles that I read where they talked about, there were rumors that black men were raping white women or doing these things. And in an article that I read, I believe this was about Atlanta, Georgia, where they went and they asked some of these women, have you been raped? And the women said no, which
Yeah.
is very surprising.
Yeah.
But people didn't believe the women. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't believe them. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was almost like whatever folks said, the end result was, why do these black towns have more than what my white town has? And
Mm-hmm.
therefore, this can't be right.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so as a result, people didn't listen
Mm-hmm.
to when people said, no, this didn't happen. When the people who are supposed to have been raped said, no, this didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
It was as if people were just looking for a
They were
reason
looking for
to
a reason.
destroy these towns.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to something that really brings chills, like Central Park.
Mm-hmm.
Central Park. In doing research for this podcast, hearing about Central Park and how it was one of these places. It's a black ghost town.
Yeah.
And how the land was taken through eminent domain.
Mm-hmm.
And usually we think about our laws as being beneficial to folks, but these laws were beneficial to folks,
Mm-hmm.
but they weren't beneficial to folks who looked like me. In other
Right.
words, they took the land because they said the land would benefit
Mm-hmm.
all of these people. But what they did is they were willing to sacrifice a self-sufficient and very supportive and valuable black community
Mm-hmm.
in order to create Central Park.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I love
I'm
parks,
pretty sure, and I'm
but-
pretty sure they weren't justly compensated.
and they were not justly compensated. And the interesting thing is, the reason the land was owned by blacks was because there was a white couple who owned all of these acres, and it was surprising. They were willing to sell to blacks. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people were not willing to sell to blacks. And think about how valuable that land is now.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Think about how valuable that
to
land
even
is.
live near there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's, and that is the reparations. It's like
Yeah.
you took this land from these families and you did not justly compensate them. And because you didn't justly compensate them, they didn't have the opportunity for that money to grow. They didn't have the opportunity to invest that money that you would have compensated them for that property. So you've got to pay up.
Yeah. So
You've
this is
got
a
to pay up.
great segue. This is a great
Mhm.
segue to, us thinking about call to action. So
Yes.
we know this information. It makes us sad every time we hear about it. But what can we do? I mean, I'm just one person, right? So
Right.
what can we do? What can we do?
There are things that we can do. And so I want to say that in every episode we will do our best. We're going to have a call to action
Call to
uh,
action.
segment, so that we listen to a lot of podcasts. There's lots of information out there, but then what do you do?
Yeah.
Nothing changes without action. And
Yeah.
so we're hoping that we can give you the inspiration and the actual resources to engage in the action that is most comfortable for you. So one of the things that I would want to talk about is an alliance that is called the Historic Black Towns and Settlement Alliance.
Yes.
So
Heard of that.
if you want to get more educated about the various towns, historical black towns, and actually become engaged in what the things that they do to educate our communities so that we don't forget it. I mean, because history is doomed to repeat itself if you don't learn about it and take the necessary steps to prevent it from being repeated. All right.
Absolutely.
So that's something tangible that you can actually do. You can, and we'll include a link to the alliance in our show notes so that you can actually go to their website and see what they're all about. So that's
Yeah.
one.
They have a lot of presentations and different
Mm-hmm.
things, and they have. I've gone to their website, and they have
Mm-hmm.
some good information. And it seems like, if I remember correctly, they were started a bunch of attorneys, right?
Yeah,
I believe it's a bunch
attorneys
of attorneys
and judges.
and judges. Yeah,
Yeah.
which I thought was very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The law community, maybe they have a perspective where they figure it's really important for folks to know about these things. And so
Absolutely.
I thought
Yeah.
that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, and I hadn't really thought about this until recently.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had thought about it, but I started to think about it even more. In Virginia, we just had the standards of learning. We just had the history objectives looked at. And so I think a call to action is for folks to really concentrate on local school boards, because people usually think about like the presidential elections as being the most important thing. But when you think about it, politics that happens at a local level. And
that
there's a
affect
lot of
you
power that
day to
yes,
day.
day to day. For example, the governor placed persons on a panel to look at the standards of learning for history. And so they actually went through, and the first iteration had the first immigrants as the indigenous folks were considered the first immigrants. And so that's completely inappropriate. So that information and inaccurate. Yes. So now we have the other iterations that are coming out. And I mention this because if we don't teach children about history and about what's happened, remember, history a lot of times is taught from the victor. But we need to make sure that history is taught from the persons who were oppressed, because their voices have been hidden. And anytime you have anyone who wants to say that, call slaves servants, which they
Mm-hmm.
used to do that. I'm not going to
Mm-hmm.
mention where, but I went to visit a plantation one time, and they kept talking about all these servants. And
Yeah.
I was a young child. I said, hey, what about the slaves?
Right.
And that was who they were speaking about. And
Mm-hmm. They try to water it down.
slaves weren't servants. They were
Right.
slaves.
They were slaves.
You know,
Yeah.
they were slaves.
There's an attempt to water it down.
To water it down. And the thing is, we can't water this down.
Mm-hmm.
There are things in our history. The history of America is fraught with sadness and pain. It's also fraught with wonderful people who gave their lives fighting for freedom and justice and really standing up. But we have to acknowledge the bad.
Absolutely, because like I said, we're doomed to repeat it.
We're doomed to repeat it, yes. And we have repeated it over and over.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know.
And another call to action, I would say, that you could do if you maybe have slightly more resources, you have good credit, you have some cash reserves, investing in real estate. For example, if you want to invest on a slightly larger scale than maybe just purchasing your own personal residence, because that certainly is a start in building wealth. I was just watching the local news, and here in Atlanta, that's where I am. And there was a gentleman who had invested in this. I can't remember how many acres of land it was, but he purchased this land and decided to develop it with tiny houses. And develop it in an attractive area, right? That would provide access for people to, jobs, and they're not way out where they'd have to commute in, that kind of thing. And these tiny houses were affordable, where lots of first-time home buyers would be able to own property. And the developer is a black man, and and he's engaging in trying to contribute to our community in a very intentional way to build that community. And so those and I watch a lot of HGTV. And I watch a lot of these shows that are about flipping, and there is a trend of different professionals, real estate professionals investing in depressed areas like Detroit, where you can buy a house for, pennies on the dollar, and rehabilitate renovate the property, and then sell it. And some of these programs, they have really altruistic intentions in that, they will rebuild these houses and sell them so that the local community could actually afford to buy a quality home. So that's something that you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the other thing, I think, is just educating yourself too, because a lot of times folks in the Black community, we have really not been taught to take risks and to venture out on our own and to do businesses and to really think about not exactly where we are, but the potential of land, or the potential of getting an education. And if you really think about it, I mean, if you're like me, my family comes from the legacy of slavery. And so does yours, Kimmy, because we're cousins. We're related.
But didn't figure that out.
Yeah, and so we have that legacy of slavery, and so we have the legacy of folks really surviving. And sometimes when you spend a lot of time surviving, it limits the time that you're able to really to dream and think about potentials. So I think it's really important that we teach children about finances and about thinking about things like credit, and also thinking about mental health and how important it is to ask for help and to really work on themselves, because those are all things that can really benefit the community and can really help us as we think
especially
about
when we're
undoing
battling
some of this.
that cellular trauma.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We should be the first in line
Absolutely.
for mental health assistance
Yeah.
and guidance.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we might be at that time. This is our last and final segment that we like to call Tell Me Something Good.
Notice how I didn't sing it. I was like, oh, I didn't think. I knew you were trying to sing it. I was like, oh.
Let's do it again. Okay. Tell me something good. So, we don't want to be all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
We want to leave you with some positivity. And so that's why we like to call this segment Tell Me Something Good. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about was, and this is something that I think a lot of us already know, but it's still a good story. And that's Bruce's Beach. And that's a prime example of what I mean by, you can't just say, okay, well, you can do these things now. You have to undo the atrocities that occurred. And so Bruce's Beach is a beach in California that was taken from a black family without adequate and just compensation. And they returned the beach to the family. Governor Newsom, in 2021, he signed a bill transferring the beach back to the descendants of Willa and Charles Bruce.
Wow.
And
wow. That deserves a cheering.
Yeah, let's hear it.
That deserves it.
So, and what they decided to do with the and I'll be the first one to say that I was surprised that the family decided that they wanted to sell it back. Right? It's like in my mind initially, I'm like, okay, well, why did they go through all of that to then turn around and sell it back? But that's not the point.
Because it's theirs. They could do it if they want it. Yes,
and if they want the cash, they should get the cash for the land so they can do whatever it is that they want to do. It's their prerogative.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay?
Absolutely.
So, and they're going to sell it back to LA County for $20 million.
Woohoo!
And they deserve it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, my piece of good news, as I was researching this, do you know that Florida actually provided reparations for folks?
Which is so surprising.
I know, Florida. Wow.
Florida.
Especially with how things are going now with everything, with DeSantis and the critical race theory.
Oh, God.
I mean, what they
crazy
did is they were able to provide money for those who were experienced Rosewood, where the town was completely destroyed. And I believe that one of the black congressional persons was one of the lead persons who was really pushing this initiative. And so shout out to Florida for doing that. I think that's great. It's ironic to me because when we think about what's going on now with banning books and all of these things, it's like this weird dystopian movie or something. It's hard to
imagine. People need to take that much more seriously.
Absolutely.
Because the banning of books, that's the beginning of
absolute
the downfall. It's like when you take education once again, you take education away. How would we know we're entitled to reparations?
Exactly.
Without
what's
education?
What's the first thing that folks did with slaves was not allow them to read. Or write. Yes. And what is it when you see a black person who is educated and smart, like really educated, and
that's the most dangerous to white supremacy.
It's very dangerous to white supremacy, which is why all of a sudden you hear this thing acting white, which wasn't created by black people.
That should be, you should be offended by that.
Absolutely. That was created to make black people feel like if they attained something that they weren't being true to themselves.
They weren't being true, right.
Yeah. So,
that kind of may lead to our next topic. That sounds like it's leading to our next topic.
I think it is too. Isn't it? I think it is too, because I think...
Well, we won't tell y'all yet. We won't tell y'all.
Okay.
You got to tune in to the next episode.
I know. This is... Yeah.
You got to click the like button and you've got to subscribe.
Yes. Wait, hold on. Gotta click it.
Clap to that.
You can tell I'm in charge of the clapping today, the clapping and the cheering, and I love it.
Oh, that's so funny.
So this has been great. This is our our first episode. I know.
That deserves some more clapping.
More clapping.
Yeah.
But you know what? Clapping and
woo!
Woo! I wish we could do clapping and cheer. Oh,
and cheer.
Actually, they did have some clapping in the cheer.
Yeah, it had clapping in the cheer.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I like that one.
I like that one. I like that one a lot. But so please stay tuned.
Yes.
We will have some wonderful episodes. We really want you all to think.
Mm-hmm.
We want to know what you know what? And we should actually ask our audience if there are topics that they are interested in. Because sometimes people hear about some obscure things that are important that get swept under the rug, and we want to help to. So if you all have any ideas, if you have some ideas, we would love to examine them from our different perspectives.
Put it in the comments.
And put it in the comments. Comments. We love comments.
Absolutely.
You know?
Well, this has been fun, Nikki.
This has been fun. Have a fabulous, fabulous time. And until next time we can go deep. Right? Go deep.
A PhD and
a JD.
We're going to get it together, y'all.
We're going to get it together.
Bye.
Bye.